Saying someone is classy or has a lot of class has become so reflexive that many of us use such metaphors unaware of their original meaning. What do you mean, and why might we not want to use them?
I think you're right that it's just habitual. If we're in this culture, if we're praising someone, we compare them to a wealthy or elite person. We say that shows a lot of class, that's classy, you're a class act. And of course, wealthy elite people don't tend to have, better behavior than others, and yet we embed that stereotype into our language. And conversely, if you're going to criticize someone for having disreputable behavior or harmful behavior, you might say, that's low class, that shows no class. And working class and poor people are no more likely to act dishonorably or disreputably than anyone else. So I think there's real classism in our ways of praising and insulting people. And I think we need to train our tongues. If you want to say that someone's actions are harmful or you don't like their behavior, just say what's wrong with the behavior. Don't compare them to someone based on class.
Right. Similarly, redneck, ghetto, trailer trash, demeaning terms often directed at people who are poor. How can we respond when we're witness to such verbal classism?
Right. Now, of course, each of those terms are used as a badge of pride by people who are in the subculture. So it's one thing for someone who actually says, oh, well, yeah, my family, we're from a redneck town and we're proud to be rednecks. That's one thing. But like a lot of terms, it's derogatory when it's used by outsiders and when it's embedded with stereotypes. So each of those, redneck, ghetto, they're very racially coded terms. Trailer trash is usually assumed to be white. They each have associations with classist stereotypes of being stupid, being violent, and it is tough when you hear someone who thinks that's just a fine way to refer to people with less class privilege than themselves. I usually try to say in some way that I'm offended, that I wish you wouldn't use that term. I ask people what it means to them and what's the behavior that they're trying to describe, and say, I'd rather if you referred to that community or that person more respectfully. And I get into some very, very interesting discussions because people will just defend to the death that these are descriptive terms and not demeaning terms.
Right. Which I think maybe speaks to the fact that it's habitual and we don't think it's such a liberal term.
Right, exactly.
Now, so in a similar vein, you choose not to use the terms upper class or lower class. What terms do you feel more accurately and respectfully describe class difference?
Yeah, we've talked about this a lot within my nonprofit Class Action, of how do we take away the metaphor of some people being higher than others and some people being lower as people. That we, of course, it's true that we have more and we have less money, education, other kinds of class advantages, but try to do it as a horizontal spectrum instead of above and below. So we don't say upper class or lower class. Lower class, when pollsters ask people, what class are you? For years, they offered upper class and lower class as options, some of the biggest national polls. And that's where the rumor came from that everyone in the U.S. calls themselves middle class, is from these polls that only give 3 options. So it's uncomfortable to call yourself upper class. It's very, you're associating yourself with a low status, demeaned category to say you're lower class. So then, 90% of everyone will choose middle class. But when you give different options and leave those terms out, for example, if you give the option of the term working class, consistently over decades, 45% of Americans polled identify as working class, which I think is roughly true, that we're in a working class majority country, so about half is about right. So at Class Action, we try to use terms that describe how people's life experience is different. So instead of something like underclass, which is very derogatory, or lower class, we say chronic poverty. Because it really is, you have a different perspective on the society, you have a very different life experience if for decades or generations your family's been below the poverty line, especially far below the poverty line. So that's a descriptive, a respectful descriptive term. For people who have high school degrees, work for wages, or have very small businesses, working class, used to be a term of pride. It's not said so much anymore. Lower middle class, if maybe you have some vocational education or a small business or home ownership, then I try not to say middle class because I think of that as like a weasel word that politicians use that means so many different things to so many different people. But professional middle class, that's descriptive of if you have a greater amount of higher education, you work a professional managerial job, you have more autonomy on the job and more status. Professional middle class really describes about 30% of the working people in the United States. And then owning class. Owning class people may go to the same four-year colleges as professional middle class people. They may work the same jobs, but they've got enough investment income that they don't have to work. And again, I think that's a unique experience that gives you a different perspective on the society if you don't really have to work. So the distinctive thing is owning those assets that generate income. So I think those four terms, we all have class backgrounds that fit somewhere on that spectrum from chronic poverty to owning class. And then we all have adult class status. And you can say we're either upwardly mobile, which I like the term straddler for upwardly mobile people, or downwardly mobile. The up and down terms do slide in there. Can't completely get away from them. The other places where people just use them to describe themselves, and there really are no replacement terms, lower middle class for that more stable, prosperous portion of the working class, and upper middle class for the more elite portion of the professional middle class. Those have the upper and lower words in them, but we haven't found any good substitutes, and we found that that is how people self-identify. So so that's the terms that Class Action is trying to promote, respectful and based on real differences in life experience.